negative effect in the future. In another hadith, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he says very clearly, don't make ibadat something disliked to yourselves by pressuring yourself to overdo it, and then whenever you pressure yourself to overdo something, then eventually it's going to have a negative reaction. And the negative reaction will be far more harmful to you than if you had taken things slowly and in a proper manner from the beginning. The Prophet of Islam, Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, he actually explains this in a metaphor. He says that if you ever kindle a fire, then when you kindle a fire, initially the fire, it is very visible and sparks fly out, anybody can see it. But then over time it begins to lessen. So this is a natural tendency that when something starts out, it's visible, it has a great deal of energy, and then over time that energy, it begins to somewhat dissipate. It might still be just as hot. Coals that don't show that flame, it's not necessarily that they've cooled down. They may continue to burn and be able to cook food for many hours, but it's not as visible. So there's a natural tendency for things to ebb and flow. The Prophet says that worship and the spirit of worship, it has the same tendency. Sometimes it will increase, sometimes it will decrease. Sometimes it will be very visible, other times it will be there, but it may be under the surface, it may not be that immediately visible. So in this context, the Prophet says that أَلَا إِنَّ لِكُلِّ عِبَادَةٍ شَرَّةً ثُمَّ تَسِيرُ إِلَى فَتْرَةٍ. Verily, every worship, it has that time when it's open, when it's visible, and then over time it moves towards a period of repose, a period where the energy is somewhat less. فَمَنْ صَارَتْ شَرَّةُ عِبَادَتِهِ إِلَى سُنَّتِي فَقَدْ اهْتَدَى. So a person who has structured their lives and planned their lives in such a way that the wave of their ibadah, when they have that high point of energy, if it flows to my sunnah, فَقَدْ اهْتَدَى. That person has achieved guidance. So when we have the high point, then we should be planning our worship, our days, our travels in such a way that as our energy may become diverted, we may have other things that enter into our mind, that we return towards what is the sunnah of the Prophet. That is a sign of guidance. وَمَنْ خَالَفَ سُنَّتِي فَقَدْ ضَلَّ. But a person who goes against my sunnah, they have been misguided. So what that means is that if I am doing so much that when my energy dissipates, I can't even maintain the sunnah of the Prophet. Right? I used to be very strict about fasting the entire month of Rajab and Sha'ban and Ramadan, and then after a few years I decided that I can't take it, and I started even maybe cutting corners in the month of Ramadan. That is a sign of misguidance. We should do things when we have the energy in such a way that when that energy dissipates, we will come back and we will flow into what is the sunnah of the Prophet. Ideally the wajib and the mustahab parts. When we have the energy, then we can do more. So the sunnah, it is there as kind of a structure for our lives. That as our energies ebb and flow, then we return to that. We never go below that baseline. So that is a sign of the sunnah of the Prophet. وَكَانَ عَمَلُهُ فِي تَبَارٍ. And a person who, they don't manage their lives, they don't plan, and then when they lose their energy, they go against the sunnah of the Prophet. They forget what is wajib. Then that person is moving towards annihilation. The Prophet says, أَمَا إِنِّي أُصَلِّي وَأَنَامُ وَأَصُومُ وَأُفْطِرُ. Verily I, as the messenger of God, I pray and I sleep. Asum wa uftir. I fast, and then on other days I eat and I'm not fasting. Wa adhaku wa abki. I laugh and I cry. فَمَنْ رَغِبَ عَنْ مِنْهَاجِي وَسُنَّتِي فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي. whoever is not satisfied with my manner and my speech or my conduct, then that person is not from me. If their entire life has to be spent in weeping, if their entire life has to be spent in staying awake but they don't sleep at night, if they are going against the sunnah of the Prophet, then they are not a follower of the Prophet, and the Prophet is dissociating himself from that person. وقال كفى بالموت موعظة وكفى باليقين غنى وكفى بالعبادة شغلا. It is sufficient for a person to have death as an advisor, as a reminder, to have certainty about our duty to Allah and our state in life in order to be wealthy and free of need, and to have worship as a preoccupation and a concern for us. That's enough for us to be worried about and concerned about in our lives, and not to be concerned about other things. Then in practicing that, we have to return to the sunnah of the Prophet and not try to become more noble, more pious, or more practicing than the character and the sunnah laid down by the Prophet. That's going to harm our soul. It's going to harm our spirituality, and as the Prophet says in this hadith, the Prophet will actually dissociate from people whose practice does not align with his. We don't see his practice as being an ideal. Salawat. And one more hadith, this is also from the Prophet, in which he gave a word of advice to Amir al-Mu'mineen. He said, Ya Ali, inna hadha ad-deen mateen. O Ali, this religion is mateen. It is firm. It has depth and profundity in it. It's not something which was thought up by the Prophet during his meditations in the cave of Hira. It was something which was revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the creator of humanity. It is profound, and it is something that can bring salvation and tranquility and peace to us. So it's something which is firm, which is solid, which is profound. فَأَوْغِلْ فِيهِ بِرِفْقٍ. So enter into it lightly, gently. When you're going into something that's solemn, that's serious, that's profound, you don't take it lightly. You don't take it as something superficial, but you make sure that you take it one step at a time, gently and carefully. وَلَا تُبَغِّضْ إِلَى نَفْسِكَ عِبَادَةَ رَبِّكَ. What does that mean? The Prophet explains. Don't make it hateful for yourself to worship your Lord by being unstable or unbalanced in practicing your religion. إِنَّ الْمُنْبَتَّ لَا ظَهْرًا أَبْقَى وَلَا أَرْضًا قَطَعًا. This is an example the Prophet gave from when people used to travel. If you have to travel from one point to another, then you can overwork your animal. If you have a camel or a horse that you're riding, if you tire out your animal before you are able to reach a place where you can replenish your water supplies, your food supplies, then it's not that you're going to get to your destination faster. Your animal will no longer be able to carry you, and now you have to figure out a way not only to carry yourself, but also to take your conveyance to your destination. An example that we might be more familiar with is if you are not a very practiced runner and you try to sprint a long distance, then it won't be very long before your legs give way and you'll have to sit down or lay down, and you'll have harmed your health and you won't be able to get to your destination at all. But if you were to take yourself at a reasonable pace, you would get to your destination a lot faster. So the Prophet, he uses that example that there are some people who try to reach their destination immediately, and they overwork their own muscles or their horse that they're riding, and لا ظهرا أبقى ولا أرضا قطع. They haven't kept their conveyance, their horse, in a good state that can never be used again. They haven't ولا أرضا قطع. They haven't actually traversed any of the earth. They haven't gotten to their destination.